The screaming came through the speakers first. Ambassador Daeun Choi sat in her seat at the Galactic Council chamber and listened to the sound of people dying. The transmission crackled with static. But the terror in those voices needed no translation. Children cried for their parents. Parents begged for help that would not come. And beneath it all, a wet, tearing sound that made even the most peaceful species in the chamber shift uncomfortably. The council chamber floated in the void above Veltara Prime, a massive station built by species who believed talking could solve any problem. Today, it would be tested. High Speaker Norala stood at the center of the circular room. Her insectoid body clicked and chittered as she processed the distress call. Her compound eyes reflected the holographic display showing a small colony world on the edge of council space. Red indicators blinked across the planet's surface. Each one represented a settlement that had gone silent. "The colony of New Haven is under attack," Norala announced, her translator making her voice sound almost musical, despite the grim news. "The Krell swarm has entered council space." A wave of panic rippled through the chamber. Daeun watched as representatives from 24 species began talking at once. The Saurians, reptilian creatures who valued order above all else, demanded to know how this was possible. The Veltari, beings of pure energy, flickered with distress. The peaceful Luminos, who looked like walking flowers, actually wilted in their seats. Counselor Vexthar, the Saurian ambassador, slammed his clawed hand on his desk. "This is outside our jurisdiction. New Haven is a frontier colony. They knew the risks when they settled there." Daeun's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "Not yet." Another counselor, Felmon of the Mollusk Confederation, rippled his translucent body. "We must consider the political implications. The Krell have never attacked council space before. This could be seen as an act of war. Then we should negotiate." Called out. Another voice. "Negotiate with the Krell?" Vexthar hissed. "They are a hive mind. They consume everything in their path. There is no negotiating with hunger itself." The distress call continued to play in the background. A woman's voice cut through the chaos. "Please, someone help us. They're eating through the walls. They're eating through..." Static. Silence. Then another voice from a different settlement began screaming. Daeun closed her eyes and counted to 10. 70 years. That's how long humanity had been part of the Galactic Council. 70 years of learning that most of the galaxy's species thought very differently than humans did. Most of them had evolved as prey animals. They were herd creatures, tree dwellers, creatures that fled from danger rather than faced it. Humanity had evolved as hunters, persistence predators who ran their prey to exhaustion. Pack animals who protected their own, with violence when necessary. And right now, every instinct in Daeun's body screamed at her to do something while these people debated. "We must form a committee," High Speaker Norala was saying. "A committee to study the situation and recommend a course of action." "A committee?" Daeun's voice cut through the chamber like a knife. Every eye and optical sensor turned to face her. "People are dying right now, and you want to form a committee?" Vexthar's tongue flicked out in irritation. "Ambassador Choi, we have protocols. We cannot simply rush into action without proper consideration." "How long will your consideration take?" Daeun asked, keeping her voice level. "An hour? A day? By then, everyone on that planet will be dead. Better some colonists than starting a war that could kill billions," Felmon said, his voice gurgling through his translator. Daeun stood up from her seat. She was shorter than most species in the chamber, but something in her stance made several counselors lean back. Humanity had a reputation in the council. They were useful when violence was needed, but they made everyone else nervous. Too aggressive, too quick to act, too much like the predators they were. "So we do nothing?" Daeun asked. "We sit here and listen to them die?" "We follow proper channels," Vexthar said firmly. "We must get authorization from the Security Council, then approval from the Military Oversight Committee. Then, that will take weeks." Daun interrupted. Then it takes weeks. Order must be maintained. The screaming continued through the speakers. A man's voice now, hoarse from shouting. They're everywhere. Oh God. They're in the nursery. The transmission cut off. Daun looked around the chamber at all these peaceful, civilized species. They were good people, most of them. They had built a society based on cooperation and consensus. They had eliminated war among themselves through patience and dialogue. But that same system made them slow, so slow, that people died while they talked. She made her decision. Her hand moved to the small device on her wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve. A personal communicator, encrypted and untraceable. She tapped out a short message in code, one that would bounce through 3 relay stations before reaching its destination. Just coordinates and a single word. Shepherd. Around her, the council continued to argue. Vexthar was proposing a fact-finding mission. Felmon wanted to send a diplomatic envoy to the Krell first. High Speaker Norala was trying to maintain order as voices rose and fell in a dozen languages. Daun sat back down and waited. She had done what she could. Now it was up to others to do what the council could not. The holographic display updated. More red indicators appeared across New Haven's surface. More settlements going dark. The Krell were fast. She had to give them that. They fell upon worlds like locusts, consuming everything organic. They had evolved in a harsh region of space, where only the most aggressive survived. To them, New Haven was just another meal. Perhaps we should evacuate the colonists, someone suggested. With what ships? Another counselor asked. The council fleet is spread across our territory. It would take days to assemble a rescue force. Then we send what we have. 3 ships? Against the Krell? More debate, more discussion, more precious time wasting away. Daun checked her communicator. No response yet, but she hadn't expected one. The message would take time to reach its destination. More time for the recipient to make a decision. She hoped he would make the right one. She hoped he would be the man she thought he was. The distress calls were getting weaker now. Fewer voices. Longer periods of silence between transmissions. The Krell were efficient, if nothing else. High Speaker Norala finally called for order. We will vote on forming an emergency committee to address this crisis. All in favor? Daun didn't bother raising her hand. She already knew how this would go. The committee would be formed. They would meet and discuss and debate, and by the time they decided on action, there would be no one left to save on New Haven. She thought about the people down there. Families who had left their comfortable lives on core worlds to build something new. Farmers and teachers and engineers who wanted a fresh start. Children who had never known any world but New Haven. All of them looking at the sky, hoping that someone would come to save them. The vote passed. The committee was formed. The chamber began to empty as counselors returned to their offices to file reports and send memos. Daun remained in her seat, watching the holographic display. Watching the red indicators spread. Watching a world die, while the galaxy's leadership did nothing. But somewhere out there, she knew, a message was being received. And if she had judged correctly, someone was already moving. Someone who didn't need committees or authorization. Someone who would do what was necessary, consequences be damned. She allowed herself a small smile. The council might stand frozen, paralyzed by their own civilized nature. But humanity had never quite learned to be that civilized. And right now, that might be New Haven's only hope. The chamber's lights dimmed as the session ended. Daun stood and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. Behind her, the speakers crackled one last time. A child's voice, barely a whisper. Is anyone coming? Please. Is anyone coming? Daun didn't look back. She couldn't, but she whispered 2 words to the empty air. They're coming. Admiral Jiho Park was drinking coffee when the message arrived. He stood on the bridge of the HDFS Indomitable, the flagship of humanity's Pacific Defense Fleet, and watched the stars stream past through the forward viewport. The coffee was terrible, as it always was on long deployments. But Jiho had learned to appreciate it anyway. Small comforts mattered when you spent months in the void. His communication officer, Lieutenant Jiwoo Han, looked up from her station. Admiral, coded message incoming. Personal encryption. Ambassador Choi's signature. Jiho set down his cup. Daeun didn't send personal messages unless something was wrong. Very wrong. Put it through to my ready room. Captain Song, you have the bridge. Captain Mireille Song nodded from her station. She had served with Jiho for 15 years and knew when not to ask questions. Yes, sir. Jiho walked into his private office and sealed the door behind him. The message appeared on his screen, already decoded by his personal AI. It was short, just a set of coordinates and a single word. Shepard. He stared at the screen for exactly 3 seconds. Then he stood up and walked back to the bridge. Captain Song, recall all patrol ships, signal the fleet, we're moving out. Mireille turned in her chair, her expression carefully neutral. Sir, we're currently assigned to Border Patrol. Moving the entire fleet requires authorization from... I'm aware of what it requires, Captain, Jiho said quietly. Signal the fleet. Maximum alert. Plot a course for these coordinates. He transmitted the data from Daeun's message. Mireille looked at the coordinates. Her eyes widened slightly. Sir, that's in Council space. That's the New Haven colony. We've been monitoring distress signals from there for the last hour. I know. Command hasn't issued any orders to respond. The Council hasn't requested assistance. I know that too. Mireille stood up from her station and moved closer, lowering her voice. Jiho, if we cross into Council space without authorization, the diplomatic consequences could be severe. We could start an incident. Jiho met her eyes. They had known each other since the academy, had fought together in the border wars, had saved each other's lives more than once. He knew she would follow him anywhere. But she deserved to know what she was getting into. People are dying, Mireille. The Krell are eating them alive while the Council debates proper protocol. Daeun sent me coordinates and activated Protocol Shepard for a reason. She knows we're the only ones who will act. And if Command relieves you of duty? If they court-martial you for this, then they do. But those people will be alive to see it happen. He raised his voice so the entire bridge could hear. I'm not ordering anyone to follow me into this. What I'm about to do violates about a dozen regulations. Any officer who wants to transfer to another ship has 5 minutes to request it. No questions asked. No marks on your record. The bridge crew looked at each other. No one moved. Lieutenant Jiwoo spoke up from her station. With respect, Admiral, we've been listening to those distress calls too. Someone should do something. Besides, Commander Hyun Lee added from the tactical station, the Marines have been getting soft. We could use some real action. A small smile crossed Jiho's face. Very well. Captain Song, signal all ships. Full fleet deployment. We go to faster than light in 10 minutes. The bridge exploded into controlled chaos as officers began working their stations. Mireille moved back to her post and started issuing orders. Navigation. Plot the fastest course. Engineering. I want maximum power to the FTL drives. Tactical. Load all weapons and prepare combat suites. Medical. Prepare for mass casualty receiving. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Salman Kang received the alert and immediately began organizing her staff. She was a xenobiologist as well as a doctor, and she pulled up everything in the database about Krell physiology. If they were going to fight these things, they needed to know their weaknesses. What she found wasn't encouraging. The Krell were biological nightmares, evolved to consume and adapt. They had acidic blood, redundant organs, and a hive mind intelligence that made them terrifyingly coordinated. Individual Krell weren't particularly smart. But the swarm thought, as one massive organism, but there were weaknesses. There were always weaknesses. She began making notes, preparing briefing materials for the combat teams. In the hangar bay, Commander Hyun Lee walked among his Marines as they prepared for deployment. These men and women were the best humanity had to offer. They had trained for every possible combat scenario, from boarding actions to planetary assault. But fighting the Krell would be something new. "Listen up," Hyun called out, his voice carrying across the bay. "We're going into hot territory. The Krell are biological horrors that will try to eat you alive. Standard ammunition might not cut it. Break out the incendiary rounds. Break out the plasma charges. I want every weapon loaded with something that will burn." The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons and armor. There was no bravado, no nervous jokes, just quiet preparation. These were people who understood violence and knew how to apply it with precision. On the bridge, Jiwoo looked up from her station. "Admiral, all ships reporting ready. Fleet composition is 37 combat vessels. We have 12 destroyers, 15 frigates, 8 cruisers, and 2 carriers with full fighter complements. Good. Send a coded message back to Ambassador Choi. 3 words. We are coming." "Yes, sir." Mireille pulled up tactical displays. "Sir, I'm running combat simulations against Krell swarm tactics. They overwhelm through numbers and biological adaptation. Standard engagement protocols won't work." "Then we don't use standard protocols," Jiho said. "The Krell evolved in a region where they were the apex predators. They've never encountered something worse than themselves." "You think we're worse than the Krell?" Jiho looked at the distress call data still streaming in from New Haven. "When we need to be? Yes. The difference is, we know when to stop." When to stop. The countdown reached 0. "All ships ready for jump," Jiwoo reported. "Take us out," Jiho ordered. "And signal the fleet. When we arrive, weapons free. No hesitation. Hit them with everything." The Indomitable's FTL drives engaged with a deep thrumming that resonated through the hull. Space twisted around the ship as it punched through into faster-than-light transit. Around it, 36 other human warships did the same, their drives creating cascading waves of distorted spacetime. They were leaving human-controlled space without permission. They were about to engage in combat operations that could have diplomatic consequences for years to come. None of that mattered to the crew. They had heard the screams. They had listened to people begging for help while bureaucrats debated. And they had decided that saving lives was more important than following rules. The fleet raced through FTL space toward New Haven. In the physics-defying realm between normal space, time moved differently. To the ships, the journey would take hours. To the universe outside, it would take days. But to the people on New Haven, every second felt like an eternity. Jiho stood on his bridge and watched the FTL readings. He thought about the choice he had made, the consequences he would face. A military career built over 30 years could end with a court-martial. He would be branded a rogue officer who ignored the chain of command. He could live with that. What he couldn't live with was doing nothing. "Admiral," Mireille said quietly, coming to stand beside him. "Whatever happens after this, you made the right call. We'll see if Command agrees." "Command isn't listening to those people die." Jiho nodded. That was the difference, wasn't it? Humanity had evolved as predators, as hunters who acted on instinct and dealt with consequences later. The council species had evolved as prey, as creatures who thought carefully before moving, who valued consensus over action. Neither approach was wrong. But right now, action was what New Haven needed. Thinking and debating could come later, after people were safe. "Time to arrival?" he asked. 4 hours, 17 minutes at current speed, Jiwoo replied. 4 hours. In 4 hours, they would either save a colony or start a diplomatic incident that could shake the entire council. Possibly both. Jiho picked up his terrible coffee and took another sip. The bridge crew rotated shifts, some heading to bunks, while others took their positions. But Jiho remained standing at the viewport, watching the impossible colors of FTL space flow past. Somewhere behind them, he knew, Council authorities were probably just now noticing that 37 human warships had left their patrol zone. Somewhere, alarms were going off. Somewhere, politicians were panicking. And somewhere ahead, on a dying colony world, people were still fighting for their lives. The Indomitable and its fleet raced through the void, a predator responding to a cry for help. The Council had stood frozen, but humanity had never learned to freeze. It had learned to hunt. The alarms started 30 minutes after Jiho's fleet entered FTL. High Speaker Norala was in her private office, reviewing committee formation documents, when her aide burst through the door. The young Veltari's energy form flickered with distress. High Speaker, emergency. The humans have mobilized their Pacific fleet. Norala's antennae twitched. Mobilized? On whose authority? No one's. High Speaker. They just left. 37 warships broke formation and entered Council space without authorization. They're heading toward New Haven. For a moment, Norala couldn't process what she was hearing. Species didn't just move military forces into Council space. There were protocols, procedures, permissions required. The entire system was built on these rules. Get Ambassador Choi on communication immediately. And call an emergency session of the Security Council. Quote, 20 minutes later, the council chamber was filled again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. If before there had been uncertainty, now there was pure panic. Councillor Vexthar was already shouting when Norala entered. This is an act of war. The humans have invaded Council space with a military fleet. They're responding to the distress call from New Haven? Ambassador Dayoon said calmly from her seat. She looked completely unbothered by the chaos around her. Without authorization, Vexthar hissed. Without following proper channels. This is exactly why we can't trust predator species with military power. They're too aggressive, too quick to violence. Dayoon met his eyes. People were dying. Still are dying. Your proper channels would have taken weeks. They don't have weeks. Quote. Councillor Felmon rippled with agitation. But the diplomatic implications. You've set a precedent that any species can simply move military forces wherever they wish. We set a precedent that someone will actually help when people are in danger, Dayoon replied. High Speaker Norala raised her primary arms for silence. Ambassador Choi, did you authorize this action? I don't have the authority to authorize military movements, Dayoon said carefully. But I did inform certain parties about the situation. You went around the council. The council was busy forming committees while people died. The chamber erupted again. Half the councillors were demanding sanctions against humanity. The other half were arguing about jurisdiction and protocols. But beneath the anger and fear, something else was happening. Several councillors were watching the tactical displays that showed the human fleet's progress. They were watching with something that might have been hope. A representative from the Luminos spoke up, her translator making her voice sound like wind chimes. High Speaker, I must point out that New Haven does have a significant Luminos population. 12,000 of my people are on that world. If the humans can save them, the Krell have also attacked the outer settlements of my people's territory, added a Saurian councillor from a different faction than Vexthar. If the human fleet is successful, they could prevent the swarm from spreading further. Vexthar slammed his desk again. You're missing the point. The humans acted without permission. If we allow this, what stops them from moving their fleets anywhere they want? What stops them from becoming a military dictatorship that enforces their will on the entire galaxy? Dayoon stood up slowly. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but somehow, it carried across the entire chamber. Councillor Vexthar, in the 70 years humanity has been part of this council, How many times have we invaded another species' territory? That's not 0, Dayun continued. How many wars have we started? Vexthar's tongue flicked in irritation. You're deflecting from Kraz? Rofar. 0. Dayun said again. How many times have we used our military power to take resources or territory from others? The answer is 0, Counselor. We have fought when attacked. We have defended our allies. We have protected trade routes from pirates. But we have never, not once, used our military for conquest or oppression. So why do you assume we would start now? Because predators are predators, Vexthar said flatly. You can't help your nature. Something dangerous flickered in Dayun's eyes. You're right that we can't help our nature. We're pack animals. We protect our pack. And whether you like it or not, the people on New Haven are part of our pack. So are the Luminos. So are the Saurians being threatened by the Krell. So yes, we acted without permission. Because permission was taking too long, and our pack was dying. Nor-Allah decided to intervene before things escalated further. The human fleet is already in transit. The question now is, what do we do about it? I propose we monitor the situation and reconvene when we have more information. Monitor it how? Felmon asked. We have observation drones in that sector, Nor-Allah said. We can watch the engagement in real time. The council agreed, mostly because no one had a better idea. Nor-Allah gave orders to route the drone feeds to the main chamber display. Within minutes, they were looking at New Haven, from orbit. The sight made several counselors look away. The planet was being consumed. Black masses of Krell bioships covered sections of the surface like spreading mold. Smaller Krell swarm ships moved between the surface and the larger vessels, carrying organic matter up to be processed. It was methodical, efficient, and horrifying. How long until the human fleet arrives? Someone asked. Approximately 2 hours, an aide reported. 2 hours of watching a world die while they waited to see if the humans could stop it. 2 hours of second-guessing and wondering if they had made terrible mistakes. Dayun sat in her seat and watched the display. She had gambled everything on Jiho, making the right choice. If he failed, if the human fleet was destroyed, it would be generations before humanity recovered diplomatically. They would be seen as reckless warmongers who got themselves killed trying to play hero. But if he succeeded, the wait was agony. Counselors tried to distract themselves with other business, but everyone's attention kept returning to the display. They watched Krell swarm patterns. They monitored the fading distress signals. They counted down the minutes. Elsewhere in the galaxy, news of the human fleet movement was spreading. Some species watched with interest, others with fear. Humanity had always been an uncomfortable addition to the Council. They thought differently, acted differently. They had concepts like honor and duty that seemed strange to species who had evolved to survive through caution and consensus. But they also had something that the rest of the Council lacked: the willingness to fight. On the Indomitable, Admiral Jiho watched the same data feeds. His tactical officers had analyzed the Krell positions and developed an attack plan. It was aggressive, possibly reckless. It was also their best chance. Dropping out of FTL in 10 minutes, Jiwoo announced. Jiho activated fleet-wide communication. All ships. This is Admiral Park. In 10 minutes, we're going to hit the Krell with everything we have. Our goal is not just to drive them off. Our goal is to make them regret ever coming to this system. We're going to hit them so hard, they think twice before attacking Council space again. Weapons free on my mark. Show them what happens when they threaten our people. He closed the channel. Mireille looked at him with a slight smile. Our people? Since when are Council colonists our people? Since they needed someone to protect them, and no one else would, Jiho replied. The fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the New Haven system. Immediately, sensors lit up with Krell signatures. There were hundreds of bioships, ranging from small fighter equivalents to massive harvester vessels. In the council chamber, the observation drones picked up the human fleet's arrival. Every counselor leaned forward, watching. 37 ships, Vexthar muttered, against hundreds of Krell vessels. This is suicide, but Daeun noticed something the others didn't. The human ships weren't hesitating. There was no cautious approach, no attempt to communicate, no careful positioning. The moment they dropped from FTL, they accelerated toward the Krell at full combat speed. They're not even slowing down, someone whispered. Admiral Jiho stood on his bridge and watched the Krell swarm turn toward them. He had fought pirates and raiders. He had commanded ships in border conflicts. But this was different. This was a fight against something that existed only to consume. All ships, he said quietly. Execute attack pattern Delta. Target the harvester vessels first. Cut off their ability to process what they've taken. Make them hungry. The human fleet opened fire, and the council watched in stunned silence as humanity went to war. Missiles streaked across the void by the thousands. Railgun rounds moved at fractions of light speed. Energy weapons carved through space, and in the first 30 seconds of combat, a dozen Krell vessels simply ceased to exist. By the ancestors, Felmon whispered. They're not fighting. They're hunting. He was right. The human fleet moved like a pack of wolves attacking a herd. They didn't spread out and defend. They concentrated fire, eliminating targets one at a time, with brutal efficiency. When Krell swarm fighters moved to intercept, human point defense systems shredded them. The Krell tried to swarm the human ships, using their superior numbers to overwhelm them. But the humans had anticipated that. They moved in coordinated groups, supporting each other, creating crossfire zones that turned the Krell's numbers into a disadvantage. They're using the Krell's own tactics against them, Daeun said, allowing herself a small smile. Vexthar watched in horror as a human destroyer rammed straight through a Krell bioship, firing all weapons at point-blank range as it did. The bioship exploded from internal pressure. The destroyer came out the other side, damaged but still fighting. They're insane, he breathed. No, Daeun corrected. They're committed. The battle raged on, and the galaxy watched as humanity showed exactly what kind of predator it was. The first wave of Krell died screaming. It was a strange thing, hearing a hive mind scream. The sound came through the void in electromagnetic bursts, a psychic wail of confusion and pain. The Krell had consumed hundreds of worlds. They had faced dozens of species. But they had never faced something that hunted them back. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Jiho watched the tactical display with cold focus. Red icons representing Krell vessels winked out one by one as human weapons found their marks. But there were always more. Always. Status report, he ordered. Captain Mireille pulled up the data. 16 Krell harvester ships destroyed. Estimated 47 fighter-class vessels eliminated. We've taken damage to 3 frigates. But nothing critical. Marine dropships are launching now. Jiho nodded. The space battle was important, but the real fight would happen on the ground. Get me, Commander Hyun. A moment later, Hyun's face appeared on screen. Behind him, Marines were rushing to their deployment pods. Admiral, we're ready to drop. The Krell are concentrated in 6 settlement zones. Hit them hard and fast. Priority is civilian extraction. Dr. Kang's teams will meet you at each LZ with medical support. Understood. See you on the other side. Hyun cut the connection. Down in the hangar bay, Commander Hyun Lee strapped into his combat armor and checked his weapons one last time. The armor was heavier than standard issue, reinforced to handle Krell acidic blood and razor-sharp claws. His rifle carried incendiary rounds that would burn at 3,000 degrees. At his hip hung a plasma blade for close combat. Around him, 200 Marines prepared the same way. These men and women came from every corner of Earth. They spoke different languages, practiced different religions, came from different cultures, but they all understood one thing. When civilians were in danger, you went and got them. No questions. No hesitation. Listen up, Hyun called out. The Krell are biological nightmares, but they bleed like anything else. You've all seen Dr. Kang's briefing. Aim for the nerve clusters. Use fire when possible. Watch your angles because their blood will eat through armor. Work in teams. No heroes. We go in. We grab civilians. We get out. Clear? Clear, sir, the Marines responded. Good. Mount up. It's time to remind the galaxy what humans do best. The dropships launched from the Indomitable's belly like steel rain. They punched through New Haven's atmosphere with sonic booms that rattled windows in settlements not yet overrun. Krell airfighters tried to intercept them, but human escort craft carved them out of the sky with precision fire. The first dropship landed in Settlement 7, a farming community now half consumed by Krell biomass. The rear ramp dropped, and Marines poured out. Weapons ready. What they saw would have broken lesser soldiers. The Krell had turned the settlement into a feeding ground. Buildings were covered in organic matter that pulsed with horrible life. The ground itself seemed to move with smaller Krell units, and in the center, trapped in the town hall, were the survivors, maybe 200 people, holding the doors with whatever they could find. Contact! A Marine shouted as Krell warriors emerged from the biomass. The creatures were nightmares made flesh. They stood 8 feet tall on multiple limbs, their bodies covered in chitinous plates. Claws like swords, mouths that opened in 3 directions, eyes that reflected no intelligence, only hunger. Hyun didn't hesitate. Fire. The Marines opened up with everything they had. Incendiary rounds punched through Krell chitin and exploded inside, cooking them from within. Plasma fire cut through limbs and bodies. Grenades created walls of flame that the Krell couldn't cross. The creatures tried to swarm them, using their numbers to overwhelm. But the Marines had trained for this. They moved in 4-person teams, supporting each other, creating overlapping fields of fire. When one Marine reloaded, 3 others covered them. When a Krell got close, plasma blades flashed, and the creature fell in pieces. Push forward, Hyun ordered. Get to those civilians. They fought through streets that had become alien landscapes. The biomass tried to grab their feet. Smaller Krell units attacked from above. Larger warriors charged from the sides. But the Marines kept moving. Kept firing. Kept advancing. Inside the town hall, Tae-jin Yu heard the gunfire and dared to hope. He was the settlement administrator, a man who had spent his career managing crop schedules and water supplies. Now he held a farming tool like a weapon and stood between the Krell and the families huddled behind him. The doors were failing. Acidic Krell blood had weakened them. Soon, they would break through. Then someone was pounding on the door from outside. This is Commander Hyun Lee, Human Defense Forces. Open up. Tae-jin couldn't believe it. The council sent help? Forget the council. Just open the door. They pulled the barricades aside. The doors swung open, and Tae-jin saw something he'd never expected to see. Human Marines in combat armor, weapons still smoking, standing between him and the nightmare outside. Everyone who can walk, move to the dropship now, Hyun ordered. Wounded, get carried. No one left behind. The evacuation was chaos, but organized chaos. Marines formed a protective corridor, while civilians ran for the waiting dropships. Dr. Saman Kang and her medical teams worked frantically, stabilizing the wounded so they could be moved. Saman had seen trauma before, but this was different. The Krell didn't just kill. They consumed. Some victims had limbs dissolved by acid. Others had been partially absorbed by the biomass before being pulled free. She worked with cold efficiency, knowing she could process the horror later. Right now, people needed her professional, not her emotional reaction. Keep them moving, she shouted to her staff. Triage on the ships. Critical cases first. The Krell attacked again, trying to reclaim their prey. But they ran into something they didn't understand. Humans fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Every Marine knew that these civilians, human and alien alike, were depending on them. Failure wasn't an option. Taejin watched a human Marine, a woman barely 20 years old, stand over a wounded Luminos civilian and hold off 3 Krell warriors with nothing but a plasma blade and sheer determination. He watched another Marine drag 2 people to safety while being wounded himself, refusing to stop until they were secure. Why? He asked Hyun, as they fell back toward the dropships. Why did you come? The council said. We didn't wait for the council, Hyun said, firing over his shoulder at pursuing Krell. Admiral Park decided some things are more important than politics. Now run. They made it to the dropship with seconds to spare. The rear ramp closed as Krell warriors slammed against the hull. The ship lifted off, its guns firing down at the creatures below. Similar scenes played out across New Haven. In Settlement 3, Marines fought through a Krell hive to reach survivors trapped in a school. In Settlement 9, they evacuated a hospital even as the building was being consumed. In Settlement 12, they held a landing zone for 2 hours against endless waves while civilians were loaded onto ships. The Marines took casualties. 3 killed in Settlement 5 when a biomass trap collapsed. 7 wounded in Settlement 11 when Krell acid blood sprayed across their positions. But they kept fighting. The Rever once take party, Win Uzids, kept saving people. In orbit, the space battle continued. Admiral Jiho watched the Marines' progress while managing the fleet action. The Krell were trying to bring in reinforcements from deeper in the system, but his ships were in the way. Target those biohaulers, he ordered. Cut off their supply line. The human fleet split into 3 groups. 1 stayed in orbit, providing fire support for the ground teams. 1 moved to intercept Krell reinforcements. The 3rd began systematically destroying every Krell harvester ship they could find. It was brutal work. The Krell fought back with everything they had. A human cruiser took critical damage and had to withdraw. 2 destroyers were swarmed by Krell fighters and barely escaped. But slowly, methodically, the humans were winning. Lieutenant Jiwoo monitored all communications, coordinating between ground teams and fleet elements. Admiral, Commander, Hyun, reports settlements 7, 3, and 9, evacuated. Settlements 5, 11, and 12, still in progress. Tell him to take his time. We're not leaving until every civilian is safe. On the surface, the last evacuation was the hardest. Settlement 12 had the largest population but also the heaviest Krell presence. The biomass had consumed half the settlement, and warriors were everywhere. Hyun stood at the landing zone, directing his Marines while waiting for the last civilians to board. His armor was scorched and dented. His rifle was running low on ammunition. Around him, his Marines looked like they'd been through hell. Because they had. Last group loading now, a sergeant reported. Then Taejin came running back. There's a family. They were hiding in a basement. They just heard the evacuation call. Hyun looked at the approaching Krell horde. Looked at his exhausted Marines. Looked at the dropship that needed to leave now, or risk being overrun. Where? He asked. 2 blocks north. Hyun grabbed 4 Marines. Everyone else, get on that ship. We'll catch the next one. Commander, there might not be, the sergeant started. That wasn't a discussion. Move. The dropship lifted off with most of the Marines and civilians. Hyun and his team ran north, into the teeth of the Krell swarm. They found the family. A human mother, with 2 children, and an elderly Luminos, who had been their neighbor. They were terrified, exhausted, but alive. We've got you, Hyun said, lifting one of the children onto his shoulders. Stay close. Getting back was a nightmare. The Krell were everywhere. The 5 Marines fought through streets, crawling with creatures, protecting the civilians with their own bodies. 1 Marine took a claw strike meant for the mother. Another used himself as a shield when Krell acid sprayed toward the children. They made it to a secondary LZ, just as a dropship came down to get them. As they loaded up, the wounded Marine who had shielded the mother looked at Hyun and grinned through his pain. "Worth it, sir." "Damn right it was," Hyun replied. In orbit, the last Krell vessels were retreating. They had lost half their number and gained nothing. For the first time anyone could remember, the Krell swarm had been driven off from a feeding ground. Admiral Jiho watched them go on his displays. He could have pursued, could have chased them down and destroyed them completely. But his mission wasn't extermination. It was protection. All ships, stand down from attack posture. Maintain defensive perimeter. Get me casualty reports and damage assessments. As the adrenaline faded, the cost became clear. 6 Marines dead, 23 wounded, multiple ships damaged, but alive. Saved from the Krell were 4,847 civilians. Human, Luminos, Saurian, Veltari, people who would see their families again because a human admiral decided that following orders was less important than saving lives. Mireille approached Jiho. "The council is probably going to have you court-martialed for this." Jiho nodded. "Probably. But those people down there are alive. I can live with the consequences." The council chamber was silent when Admiral Jiho Park entered. It had been 1 week since the Battle of New Haven. 1 week since a human fleet had entered council space without authorization and fought the Krell to a standstill. 1 week of diplomatic chaos, emergency meetings, and heated debates about what to do with the admiral who had broken every rule in the book. Now he stood in the center of the circular chamber, still wearing his uniform, while representatives from 24 species looked down at him. High Speaker Norala spoke first. "Admiral Park, you have been summoned to answer for your actions at New Haven. You are aware of the charges?" Yes, High Speaker," Jiho replied calmly. "Unauthorized military deployment, violation of council space, engagement in combat operations without proper authorization, approximately 17 other violations of council military protocol. And do you dispute these charges?" "No. I did all of those things." A murmur ran through the chamber. Councillor Vexthar leaned forward, his tongue flicking in satisfaction. "Then you admit you acted outside your authority? That you violated the very laws that keep this council functioning?" "I admit I broke regulations, yes," Jiho said. "But I don't admit I was wrong to do it." The murmur grew louder. Vexthar's scales flushed with color. "You don't admit you were wrong? You acted like a rogue officer. You could have started a war. I saved 4,847 lives," Jiho interrupted quietly. "While this council debated and formed committees, people were dying. So yes, I broke your regulations. I'd do it again." Vexthar slammed his desk. "This is exactly what I warned about. Predator species cannot be trusted with military power. They're too aggressive, too willing to act without thought." "Without thought?" Captain Mireille Song spoke up from where she stood beside Jiho. "We analyzed Krell tactics. We studied their biology. We planned our assault to minimize casualties while maximizing effectiveness. We extracted civilians under fire while holding off an enemy that outnumbered us 3-1. That wasn't thoughtless. That was calculated military action. Undertaken without authorization," Vexthar insisted. Ambassador Daeun Choi stood from her seat. "Counselor, may I ask a question? If Admiral Park had waited for proper authorization, how long would that have taken?" Norala consulted her files. "The Security Council would have needed to convene, then the Military Oversight Committee, then a vote from the full council. Realistically, we would have been able to authorize a response in 3 to 4 weeks. And in that time, everyone on New Haven would have been dead," Daeun said simply. "So we faced a choice. Follow proper procedure and let people die, or break the rules and save them. Admiral Park chose to save them." The rules exist for a reason, Felmon gurgled. Without them, we have chaos. Any species could simply deploy military forces wherever they wish. Before Daeun could respond, there was a commotion at one of the chamber's side entrances. A group of civilians was being allowed in, over the protests of several counselors. At their head was Taejin Yu. He walked to the center of the chamber and bowed respectfully to the high speaker. Forgive the interruption, but I was told. This was a public proceeding. I'm Taejin Yu, Administrator of Settlement 7 on New Haven. I wanted to speak on behalf of the 4,847 people the Admiral saved. Norala's antennae twitched uncertainly. This is irregular, but very well. Speak. Taejin turned to face the council. I'm not a military person. I'm a farmer. I spent 20 years growing food and managing irrigation systems. When the Krell came, I hid in a town hall with my neighbors and waited to die. We listened to our children cry and wondered if anyone in the galaxy cared enough to help us. His voice grew stronger. The council said you needed time to consider, time to form committees, time to follow proper channels. But we didn't have time. The Krell were eating through our walls. And then, when we had given up hope, we heard weapons fire. We heard someone fighting back. And when the doors opened, it wasn't council peacekeepers. It was human marines. Taejin looked directly at Jiho. Admiral Park, you broke regulations to save us. But you know what else you broke? You broke the idea that prey species and predator species can't work together. You broke the assumption that humans only care about humans. Among the people you saved were Luminos, Saurians, Veltari, and a dozen other species. You didn't ask what species we were before you came. You just came. More civilians stepped forward. A Luminos mother spoke about the Marine who had shielded her children with his own body. A Saurian elder described watching human soldiers fight with injuries that would have incapacitated his own people. A young Veltari told how Dr. Salman Kang had worked for 18 hours straight, treating wounded regardless of species. By the time they finished, several counselors were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Vex Thar, however, wasn't convinced. This is an emotional appeal. But emotion cannot override the need for order and procedure. If we excuse Admiral Park's actions, we set a precedent that someone will actually help when we're in trouble. The Luminos mother interrupted. I'd rather have that precedent than one where we die while you debate. Norala raised her arms for silence. The survivor's testimony is noted. However, Counselor Vex Thar raises a valid concern. Admiral Park, if we excuse your actions, what stops other species from acting unilaterally? What prevents military forces from moving through council space whenever they decide it's necessary? Jiho met her compound eyes steadily. High Speaker, may I ask you a question? In the 70 years, humans have been part of this council. How many times have we abused our military power? That's not 0 times, Jiho continued. We've fought pirates. We've protected trade routes. We've responded to threats. But we've never used our military for conquest or oppression. Our entire military doctrine is based on protection. It's what we evolved to do as pack animals. We protect our pack. But everyone isn't your pack, Vexthar argued. Maybe not, Jiho admitted. But the people on New Haven needed protection. And no one else was providing it. So, yes, we acted. We'll always act when lives are at stake. You can court-martial me for it. But it won't change what we did. And it won't stop the next human admiral from making the same choice if the situation comes up again. The chamber fell silent. The truth of Jiho's words hung in the air. Humans would always choose action over procedure when lives were at stake. It was fundamental to who they were. Finally, a counselor from a species that hadn't spoken yet stood up. She was from the Dendari, a tree-like species from the Outer Rim. High Speaker, may I suggest a different approach? We've been debating whether to punish Admiral Park. But Perhaps we should be asking a different question. Why did we need him to break the rules in the first place? Norala's antennae perked up. Explain. The Krell attacked a council colony, and our response time would have been measured in weeks. That's unacceptable. We have no rapid response capability because we've never needed one. But the galaxy is changing. Threats don't wait for committees. So perhaps instead of punishing the humans for acting, we should ask them to act more often. Officially, the chamber erupted in debate again. But this time, it was different. Instead of arguing about punishment, counselors were discussing the idea of a rapid response force, a military unit that could act quickly when disasters struck. Daeun caught Jiho's eye and gave him a small nod. This was what she had hoped for. Not that Jiho would be praised, but that his actions would force the council to confront its own limitations. The debate continued for hours. Vexthar argued against giving humans any kind of official military role. But he was increasingly alone. Other counselors pointed out that the Krell wouldn't be the last threat requiring quick action. Pirates were growing bolder. Unknown species from beyond council space were being encountered more frequently. The galaxy was becoming more dangerous, and the council needed to adapt. Finally, Norala called for order. We will vote on 2 measures. First, the matter of Admiral Park's actions. Second, a proposal to create an official council rapid response force, with humanity taking a lead role. All in favor of censuring Admiral Park for his unauthorized actions? About a third of the counselors voted in favor. It was enough to officially record the censure, but not enough to mean anything serious. The censure is recorded, but considered a minor violation given circumstances, Norala announced. Now, all in favor of creating a rapid response force? This time, the majority voted yes. Even Vexthar abstained rather than voting against. The measure passes, Norala declared. Ambassador Choi, Admiral Park, the Council officially requests that humanity take responsibility for rapid response operations within Council space. You will have the authority to act without prior authorization in emergency situations. Details will be worked out by committee, but the principle is established. Jiho and Daeun exchanged glances. They had come here expecting a court-martial. Instead, they had just been handed official authorization to do what Jiho had done anyway. We accept, Daeun said, but we have conditions, which are, first, all species contribute to the response force, not just humans. We'll take the lead, but this is a council operation. Second, oversight will be handled by an emergency council that can make decisions quickly, not the full bureaucracy. Third, we get access to improved intelligence networks, so we know about threats before they become crises. Norala considered this. Agreed. We'll draft the formal proposal within the week. As the session ended and counselors began filing out, Taejin approached Jiho. Admiral, I wanted to thank you personally. You didn't have to come. You could have followed orders and let us die. But you didn't. We couldn't let that happen, Jiho said simply. We heard you calling for help. Someone had to answer. Why, though? We're not your people. Some of us aren't even human. Jiho looked at the survivors gathered around him. Humans, Luminos, Saurians, Veltari. Different species, different backgrounds, but all of them people who had needed help. You needed someone to protect you, he said. That makes you our people. That's what being part of a pack means. It's not about species or politics. It's about being there when it matters. Taejin nodded slowly, understanding. The galaxy is lucky to have predators like you. No, Captain Mireille said, joining them. The galaxy is lucky that we've learned to direct our predator instincts toward protection instead of conquest. That's what makes us different. Later, as Jiho and his officers prepared to return to the fleet, Daeun walked with them to the docking bay. You know this changes everything, she said. The Council has officially acknowledged that they need us, that they can't handle every threat through debate and consensus. Are you worried we'll abuse that power? Jiho asked. No. I'm worried about the weight it puts on your shoulders. Being the galaxy's protectors is a heavy burden. Jiho looked back at the council chamber, thinking about all the species inside. Peaceful, civilized, trying their best to build a better galaxy through cooperation. They had created something beautiful, but beauty needed protection in a harsh universe. Someone has to stand guard, he said. Someone has to be willing to fight so others don't have to. Humans evolved as hunters, as pack predators. For most of our history, that made us dangerous. But maybe here, among species that need protection, it makes us necessary. The sheepdog among the sheep, Daeun said softly. Something like that. It's not a glamorous role. We'll do the violent work so others can stay peaceful. We'll break the rules when lives are at stake and accept the consequences. And maybe, over time, we'll teach other species that sometimes action is more important than consensus. They reached the docking bay where a shuttle waited to take them back to the fleet. Before boarding, Jiho looked out at the stars. The council stood frozen, he said. But humanity answered. And next time there's a crisis, we'll answer again. That's what we do. That's who we are. He boarded the shuttle, followed by his officers. As it pulled away from the station, Daeun watched it go and allowed herself a smile. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. When people cried out for help, when monsters came in the night, when the rules didn't move fast enough to save lives, humanity would be there. Not because they were ordered to, not because it was politically advantageous, but because at their core, humans were pack animals who protected their own. And now, the entire galaxy was their pack. The shuttle disappeared into the void, heading back to a fleet that had broken every rule and saved thousands of lives in the process. And somewhere out there, another crisis was probably already brewing. Another situation where quick action would matter more than proper procedure. When that call came, the council would no longer stand frozen, because now they had predators who answered.